Hello, my name's Tom Stapleton, Executive Director of the Wakefield Community Access Television Station. And today we have Senator Jason Lewis with us. And we do this a couple of times a month, or actually once every 2 months probably. And he brings us up to date on everything that's going on. And we have a whole lot to go through.
Good to see you again, Tom.
Yes, it is.
Good to be back with you. Lots to catch up on.
Lots to catch up on. It's been a busy time. Very busy time, yeah.
It's that time of the legislative,
Yeah.
two-year legislative session. We just wrapped up the end of what are known as the formal sessions. So a lot of legislation gets worked out in that in the last couple months.
That's really great. Well, that brings me to the first question. Fiscal year 17, budget highlights. And I understand that that includes funding for the Wakefield Arts Center. Can you give us a little history about that?
Yes, so the state budget is the most important legislation, really, that we work on every year, obviously along with the governor. And we just wrapped up work on that now. The new fiscal year started July 1st, so we're in the new fiscal year now. It's a pretty tough budget year in terms of the expected revenues that we have, but we were able to increase the funding for our schools. So Wakefield schools will be seeing an increase in school Chapter 70 funding. Also, local aid is a pretty healthy increase, and some funding for things like substance abuse treatment and some other important programs. For Wakefield specifically, I worked with State Representatives Broder and Wong, and we included some specific funding for a few key programs in Wakefield, one of which is the new Arts Center on Albion Street, which I know is a wonderful new resource in town. It's great for the artistic scene. I know it also brings people into the downtown and increases traffic, local pedestrian traffic, and supports the restaurants and businesses. So we were able to include $100,000 in the state budget that will go towards some of the renovations. And unfortunately, the Governor Baker had actually vetoed that funding. He vetoed a lot of very local funding that was included for various different communities. But along with the state reps, we were able to override that funding. So that's now been restored into the budget. There's also some additional funding specifically for Wakefield to purchase Narcan, which is a substance which is used by our first responders to reverse opioid overdoses, and it's really a lifesaver. So that will help the Wakefield Fire Department and Police Department. So there's some funding in the budget for that as well. Right.
Well, I was thinking when you talk about the budget for the fiscal year 16, 17. Why is it so different than the year before? I mean, it seemed like the year before things were better, and now they're not. Is that my interpretation, or?
No, you're right, because it caught us a little bit by surprise. The state economy is really quite strong. We've had pretty good growth, better than the national average. Our unemployment rate in Massachusetts is a little over 4%, so it's come way down from where it was in the recession. And so when we started the budget process, basically back at the beginning of the year, we were projecting revenue growth of about 4.5%. And that was based on the best projections from economists and people in finance. And then what happened is, the stock market really kind of took a dive. Some people attributed some of that to the Brexit vote over in the UK, which kind of rippled through the markets. And capital gains revenues, which is one of the sources of tax revenue the state relies upon, really started to come in much lower than expected. And so when we projected forward into the new fiscal year, we had to revise our revenue projections. And so right now, rather than projecting about 4% growth, we're now expecting more like 2.5% growth in revenue.
So that's almost half.
So basically, so the revenue's still increasing because the economy's growing, but it's not at the same rate. And so assumptions we had made in the budget process just even a few months ago about resources we would have available, we had to go back and make some changes. And so the legislature actually had to reduce the budget by about $400 million, which was tough. And then in addition to that, the governor issued almost 300 vetoes of specific funding in the items in the budget. But the legislature did act to override many of those vetoes because those are funding for programs, like the Arts Center in Wakefield, like special education, like the Mass Cultural Council, like mental health funding, like many other important programs that we did not want to cut the funding for those.
Now, speaking of other programs, Alzheimer's. What do you? I know that you have something in mind for that. Can you give us a little more information on that one?
Yes. So one of my responsibilities is to serve as chair of the Public Health Committee for the state, and so we've been very busy this legislative session working on a number of different issues. One of which is dementia and Alzheimer's. We know that there are many people in the state, many families already struggling with Alzheimer's. And we know that it's likely to increase because of the aging of the population. So there's legislation we're working on now that would basically create a statewide Alzheimer's plan. Okay. So it would really look at everything we're doing today in terms of diagnosis, treatment, support, family supports, research, all the different aspects. What are we doing well? Where are the gaps? What do we need to do to close those gaps? Where do we need to do better? Do we need additional funding? Is there funding we could be getting from the federal government or from nonprofits that we can focus in this area? So I'm hopeful that we will still get that final legislation to Governor Baker in the next few months.
Wonderful. That's good. It is a serious problem today.
It is, and many families struggling with it, and I know indeed in your own family. So that's
well, thank you. It's an interest important to us. Change the subject. I understand the governor signed the first public records reform in 40 years, and you had an awful lot to do with that. How about bringing us up to date on that?
Yes, that was very exciting.
That's great.
It was legislation that I had filed in the state Senate. And the Governor Baker signed it a few months ago, and we had a ceremony in his office, which I was very fortunate to be able to be there for that. Public records, basically, what we're talking about is government information. It can be official documents, it can be emails, it can be other records that are, as the name implies, public, which means they're not confidential. They should be available to the public, regular citizens, the media, whoever would like to get that information, and that could be from either a state government agency or from a city or town. The public records law in Massachusetts was written in the early 1970s. You think back then, we didn't even have electronic records, for example. So the world has changed substantially. Most of the records are now electronic, and the law had never been updated. So we've heard lots of stories of people trying to get access to information where they did not get it in a timely fashion. They were sometimes charged a lot of money to get what is rightfully theirs. It's public. So it's been a concern of mine for some time because for me, if people having access to public information, to me, is very critical to having a transparent government. If you can't get information about what the government's doing and what's happening, how do you hold the government, accountable? So that's why I've always viewed this as an important issue. So we worked hard on this. The Senate and the House both passed legislation. We had to work to reconcile some differences, and that's the legislation the governor signed. It will lead to most of the information being available online, so it'll be out there and posted online for people to just be able to get on, simply themselves. We've capped the fees that can be charged, and so to try to make sure that they're not excessive and they're reasonable. We've put some more teeth in the law so that we really want to make sure that our state and local governments, take it seriously, and that when information is requested, that they do respond and provide it in a reasonable amount of time.
About how long did it take you to get this process done?
Well, I had I'd worked on this bill when I served in the House of Representatives,
wow.
and I served in the House for about 5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when I moved to the Senate about 2 years ago, I became the lead sponsor, so I was kind of championing it. And so then it took, so it's been quite a number of years to get this all the way across the finish line. But you know, I think it's an important update of our public records law, and it will make the government, I believe, our government more accessible and more transparent to the public.
I'm sure it will. It's a big compliment.
Particularly important for the media.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's the media that is looking to, you know, highlight what's happening for people, and they need access to these public records, and that's important so that people are informed.
Good job. Very, very good. Now, your advancing landmark tobacco legislation, where does that stand? I know you've been working hard on that one, too.
That's another priority for me as chair
Yeah.
of the Public Health Committee. We talked about Alzheimer's, and tobacco is also important because you know, we still, even though we've been able to reduce the rates of cigarette smoking, we have a lot of new products that have come out, you know, like electronic cigarettes, like fruit and candy flavored cigars and smokeless tobacco. And unfortunately, a lot of these products are really appealing to our teenagers. You know? So, for example, Wakefield, through the Board of Health, has done a great job in updating the regulations to try to keep these products out of the hands of kids, and that includes raising the age from 18 to 21. So I've been working hard to make those kinds of policies statewide. And we had a very good bill that we brought before the Senate several months ago. It passed the Senate 32-2. So we had a strong, you know, bipartisan vote to raise the minimum legal age from 18 to 21, because we know that's very effective in keeping these tobacco products out of high school social networks, and that's why it's effective in reducing rates. And it also would regulate e-cigarettes in a responsible way, because those have been exploding. So it's really legislation focused on teens, you know, really not about adults. So after it passed the Senate, it went over to the House, but the House has not taken up the bill yet. So we're still hoping that will happen. You know, our state representatives here in Wakefield have been very supportive, and others. There's a lot of support for the legislation, but we have to still get the House of Representatives to hopefully debate it before we can get it to the governor.
I mean, as far as these e-cigarettes go, I mean, some of the information that's coming out now, because they have been doing research on them, it's horrible. It really is, and it seems like people feel as though that they're not as bad as a real cigarette, but apparently,
we're starting to learn. You know, they're new. They certainly they still provide, you know, can get you, provide nicotine, which is the active ingredient, and nicotine is highly addictive. So, you know, I've generally stayed away from drawing any conclusions when it comes to adults. Because some adults who have been long-time cigarette smokers will say that they've been able to switch to e-cigarettes, and that overall that's better for their health. But what I am focused on is kids and teenagers, because what we don't want them to think is that this is somehow safe, and, you know, okay, we know we shouldn't smoke cigarettes or chewing tobacco, but e-cigarettes are cool. You know, they come in strawberry flavor and cotton candy.
It's just,
and that's what we really have to know, make sure our kids know that this is not a safe product at all, and, you know, it will certainly get you addicted to nicotine, and there's many, you know, harmful health consequences from that down the road.
Well, it sounds like that's on the road to...
We're going to keep working on that.
To being something coming up there. The legislature is advancing consumer protections on ride-sharing like Uber and Lyft. That's a biggie. Now, there's something just recently passed, don't they?
Yes, that legislation is wrapped up.
Yeah.
And it's on Governor Baker's desk, actually.
Okay, yeah.
So we expect him to sign it. Maybe even by the time our viewers at home are watching this, it may have been signed. But it's pretty exciting. You know, people, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with Uber and Lyft and other services, which are ride sharing, and they've exploded in popularity because they tend to be more convenient in some cases than taxis, and they're cheaper as well. And but the problem we've had is they haven't really been regulated at all. So
Yeah.
you don't always know whether whether the driver has had a background check, or is there sufficient insurance, that if you were in an accident. So
Right.
all the things we do in terms of making sure taxis are safe, haven't necessarily been in place. So this legislation will require, appropriate background checks for drivers, that the vehicles are safe and have been fully inspected,
Yeah.
that there's insurance in place, and it won't limit where they can do pickups. There was some debate about
Right,
whether they
yeah.
could pick up at Logan, or
They can
the
now.
legislation will allow that
Yeah, they
to
will
go
allow
forward.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
The companies like Uber and Lyft will have to negotiate with Massport,
Ah.
to work out the security issues and that, but they can do that. So overall, there's also a very small fee that we included that would be assessed on each ride,
20
like
cents?
20 cents.
Yeah.
And then that money would go, most of that would go to our cities and towns where the ride originated, and they would be able to use that for fixing roads
Okay.
and sidewalks
Yeah,
and
yeah.
bridges. So that's important too, because we have a lot of needs for transportation infrastructure. And then a little bit of the money would go to support some of the workforce development in the taxi industry, because we do know that it is hurting a lot of our
I know.
existing taxi.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. There's just so many people, and there's just so many cars, so it is taking away some of that from the taxi people. So
It is, and,
Yeah.
and there's probably that's the way the world works.
That's the works,
New
yeah,
technologies. But again, there's people who've invested in medallions, for example,
Yeah.
and they had certain expectation about that. So we do owe them an ability to transition if they want
Right.
to leave the taxi business, and help them transition to something else.
all right. Now let's see. There's a big energy bill which has come at a critical juncture for our state's energy policy. Can you give me more about that? Because I'm
Yeah,
not
this
tuned
is,
into that yet.
This is another area where we've been working for
Yeah.
basically the last year, but the House and the Senate, finally wrapped up our work
Yeah,
just
yeah.
within the last few weeks, and that's another bill that is on Governor Baker's desk as we speak. So we fully expect him to sign that. And basically, what's happening there is, we are trying to transition the state away from fossil fuels increasingly to
Right.
clean energy. We have goals that we've set for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which are causing climate change, and we have legally binding targets in Massachusetts that we have to hit by 2020 and then by 2050. And so we know we've got a lot of work to do to hit those. Plus, we also are concerned that we have pretty high electricity prices in Massachusetts, and so we do want to increase the supply of energy to bring those down over time. So this legislation, the two main things it does is it will lead to the creation of an offshore wind energy industry. I've heard Massachusetts described as the Saudi Arabia of wind. I don't know if I mentioned that last time we were together. But
I don't know, but no, that's right,
offshore,
yeah.
off the coasts, we have tremendous wind energy.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that there was a lot of controversy with Cape Wind, which was actually fairly close to shore,
Yeah.
and that project probably won't go forward. But what we're now looking at is projects that are further offshore, and there's a lot of energy potential.
Yeah.
So this legislation will require the utilities to competitively bid for procurements in offshore wind energy, certain amount that they have to procure over the next decade. And that will bring in a lot of new energy into the state. And also, in addition to that, we also will be procuring hydropower. That will probably come from Canada. And so those are the main provisions. There's also some additional efforts to increase energy efficiency and energy storage efforts. We did some work earlier in the year to increase the amount of solar power and continue to support that. So in general, we're looking at ways to keep growing the amount of clean renewable energy, and so we can increasingly replace oil and natural gas.
Right.
And we also have to replace nuclear because the nuclear power plant down in Plymouth has announced they're going to be going offline. So we have to replace that power in the years ahead too.
Yeah.
So it's a good bill.
Yeah.
I'm always eager to go further when it comes to our energy policy. So there were some things that the Senate did include, which didn't make it into the final legislation, but we'll keep at it.
Do you think that'll be signed?
Yes, the
soon?
governor has
Yeah.
been very supportive of both
Okay.
increasing offshore wind and hydropower.
Hydro, yeah.
So I do expect, that I know he's looking closely now, but that was something that we worked on,
Yeah.
pretty collaboratively between the governor, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. So I do think that'll become law. And we are probably, along with California, the most furthest along when it comes to converting to clean energy, renewable energy. And it's been great for also for our economy. We've
Right.
created a lot of new jobs in these industries.
That's right,
And
yeah.
you imagine, as we build an offshore wind industry, that has tremendous potential for
Yeah.
job creation.
huge,
Because
yeah.
you're creating a whole new industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of those jobs do have to be local.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's good potential there.
That's exciting. It really is. I'm really excited about that one. Okay, landmark pay equity bill that was just passed into law. That sounds exciting. Tell me a little about that.
That one, that has been signed by the governor.
Yeah.
In fact, we just had a signing ceremony just on Monday of this week, so
Okay.
people may have seen or heard about that. And I'm very pleased about that because, although we've made a lot of progress in over the last several decades in reducing gender discrimination and increasing women's participation in the workforce, many people are surprised to learn that in Massachusetts, on average, for the same kind of work, a woman earns 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns.
Okay.
So we still have a significant
gap there,
gap.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
better than the rest of the country, and it's a lot better than it used to be. But it's still 18 cents, and that really hurts a lot of families. You think about families that are rely on two incomes. Think about families that are headed by a woman, single household. A lot of low-income households. That really hurts their earnings. So it's been a goal to really address that, but it's been a thorny issue because the business community's been concerned about whether it would increase liability for them.
Yeah,
So the Senate and the House worked very closely with the business community and with advocates, and the final legislation actually passed unanimously in both chambers, and Governor Baker obviously signed it. And we think it's probably the strongest pay equity bill in the country. Interestingly, Massachusetts was the first state, and this was all the way back, I think it was either the 1940s or the 1950s, to pass legislation saying that gender pay discrimination was against the law. So we said that a long time ago, that you shouldn't discriminate based on gender. But what happened was that legislation said, it said that you should be paid the same for comparable work, that men and women should be paid. But the bill never defined comparable work. So we've had problems over the years, and there's been a number of different cases in our courts that have, but that was never clear. So one of the main things this bill does is it really tries to define what can be considered comparable work. And it also gives our businesses essentially, as long as they do a periodic review of their salaries, then it basically they would not be subject to to litigation or a lawsuit, as long as they are making that they're actually transparently looking at their salaries and demonstrating that where there is a pay gap for comparable work, they're looking to close them. Another very important provision that I think will help women and men is employers will no longer be allowed to ask you when they first give you a job offer, they won't be allowed to ask you what your salary was in your previous job. Because the problem is that often is used to, it perpetuates lower salaries. Because then a lot of times an employer will just offer you what you were earning before, or maybe slightly more.
It's their guideline.
It's that's right. Even though for the job they're hiring, they might have been willing to pay more than that. So that will help, as I said, I think women and men. It's an important change. So quite historic, and I'm glad to see our state, leading the country again on an important economic equality issue.
Well, I mean, we have a few minutes left. It goes fast, and you've really covered a lot of ground in this talk, and as far as all the things that have happened, and it's really, it's really good to see that people are getting together and
Mm-hmm.
making decisions and not tying things up forever.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
mean,
it's good. I think local government. We've
Yeah.
talked about this before.
Yeah.
Right here in the town, people really work hard. They work together.
Mm-hmm.
And they generally, do a good job getting things done in the, school committee, the board of selectmen, the planning
Yeah.
board, and also in the state government. I think again we do have two parties, and we do disagree at times on things, but we really try hard to work together and respect each other. And I think it shows because we get our budget done every year, and it's
Done,
balanced.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we've passed some important legislation. We talked about energy and pay equity and ride-sharing and other bills. And I wish we could see more of that on the federal government.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of these same challenges face the whole country.
yeah. Right, yeah.
So, but we can do only what we can do, and keep
moving forward.
Right?
Well, we have a couple of minutes left, so this question is something that I'm dying to ask you, and you can deal with it any way you want, but have you got any quick thoughts about the presidential election?
Do I? We only have a few minutes.
We only
right,
have a
Tom?
couple of minutes.
You got me left with a good one for
No,
the end.
I said what the heck.
Well, I am a supporter of Hillary Clinton,
Yeah.
and I endorsed her a while back, and I do admire her greatly. I know there are many people who have concerns about some of her things she's done or statements she's made, and I respect that. But on balance, I think she certainly shares the values I have, and I think she's very, very experienced and qualified
Right,
to
yeah,
serve as
yeah,
president. The experience she's had throughout her career. So I have no doubt she will make a very effective president. I'm really shocked. I continue to be shocked at what's been happening on the Republican side. Traditionally the Republican Party, we've had differences, but they've had candidates who are very qualified, who are have the potential to be great leaders. I mean, obviously we've had great Republican presidents, and just what we're seeing right now, from Donald Trump and the way he behaves and the way he treats people, and just sort of what he's bringing out the worst, I think, in many of our fellow Americans, and I just. I'm worried about that, even after this election is over, what that means. So, I just hope that the consequences of this are
It's a tough
not
call.
too long lasting.
It's tough.
'cause It's
It is.
very
It's
divisive for our country, and it doesn't contribute to solving our problems.
Right. I think that's enough. You did well. Very good there. But so I'm looking forward to our next show in a month or two, and we'll have a lot.
Probably
more
closer even to the presidential election.
That's right.
So if we want to, we
Yeah,
can.
yeah, you
we
could
can
do
talk
that.
more at
Yeah,
that time.
that'd be great.
See. Oh, the other good topic
Yeah.
later. In addition to voting for president in November and
Mm-hmm.
for various state offices, there's also going to be several very important ballot questions.
That's right.
On the ballot in Massachusetts. So one of those deals with charter schools. One of those deals with marijuana. So that's a topic I think that we should talk about later.
Well, we got to end. We got to end
Today.
We
Okay.
used it up. Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Senator.
Tom.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I know.